So we decided to take the little book by Tom Rainer, former and now retired president of Lifeway Christian Resources, owned by our own Southern Baptist Convention, and look at those 6 chapters, those 6 pledges that he summarizes each one of those chapters with ideas and concepts about who we are when we are a part of a church, what it means to be a part of a church, how God designed and created us together as a part of the church and have this experience. And so we're in week 2. So if you're using the little note cards, if you didn't remember to bring them back, there's some right here. And I'm sure Natalie and Carly and some of these will be glad to grab these and bring them back to you. Anybody need the packs of note cards to be able to look at the pledge or take? Yeah, you guys want to help me out? There's actually a lot of hands up. We weren't real sure last week because everybody left them laying in the pews. We didn't know if that was because you knew exactly where you were going to sit this week. You just thought you would leave it there. Or if you forgot it, or if you didn't want it. It's just a little ring. All it has is a place on the back you can write your notes if you want to. On the front side, it has a copy of the pledge. The pledge is not something we're saying or reciting like a confession in any way. It's just the way Tom Rainer summarized each of the chapters. And we're not looking at the chapters themselves. We're actually looking at a single passage of Scripture reflected in the chapter. And this just kind of gives us a summary statement of what that looks like. This may be one of the more difficult messages in some ways, maybe not so much for you, but definitely for me, because this is a difficult topic, and it's a difficult topic, I think, primarily because we don't really know what it is. So we're talking about, last week we talked about being a functional member, how God has taken the diversity of who we are and all of our individual parts and how everything we are in the body of Christ comes together in one unit to accomplish his purpose, and God works that out in a very specific way so that all the individuality comes together in this functioning unit to accomplish this purpose, to share with people the hope that's found in Jesus. And there's this interworking between all of us that gather and are a part of a local church, and how God works through us then to reach and touch the world. This week is similar, but it's different because this is about being a unified member. This is what it means to be a part of something that is unified, to look forward, to make it a purpose of our drive and our motivation to be a church that's unified and to experience unity. And part of the reason I think that's difficult is we just simply don't know. Unity is one of those very difficult things to look up. I could have looked up the specific word in the dictionary. I didn't. You could look it up right now and see what it is, and but it's so much more than a definition. It's just the definition doesn't really encapture every aspect of it. What is unity? What does it mean to be a part of something that's unified? And what does it mean to see God work through something that he's designed, like the church, in a unified way? And we have troubles defining it. We know it intuitively. In other words, you have an idea. If this church is unified, then this is what it looks like. This is what unity looks like. But the problem is, because it's hard to define, we have all these conflicting voices. I mean, how many times have we heard that in the last few weeks? We've heard calls for unity. I'm presenting a unified plan for the future of America. And in the same voice, in the same breath in some cases, but these people over here are dirtbags and I can't stand them and they're horrible. I mean, you can't have unity and be calling somebody else dirtbags, and it just doesn't work. And so we hear conflicting messages and we have conflicting experiences. A number of years ago, I was in consultation with a church. I was helping them work through some things and some transitions and different things that were going on in the life of the church. And we talked about unity. And the conclusion was, when we were in a focus group, the conclusion was, well, what we could do to really create unity in our church is we should order church shirts. And then we could encourage everyone on Sunday to wear the church shirt with the church branding on it. And then it would be obvious we're unified. Because that's what Jesus said when he prayed in John 17. They will know we are Christians by our matching t-shirts. If that wasn't humorous enough, because guess what? That's not unity. We could all wear the exact same shirt, but that doesn't mean we're unified in anything other than our apparel choice on that Sunday morning. But I was actually in a deacon retreat one time, not with my deacons, but with another church, again, consulting them, speaking to them that weekend in that retreat. And when I asked, okay, well, how do you guys demonstrate unity in your church? And one of the deacons raised his hand and he said, oh, our deacons are some of the most unified deacons. I said, okay, how do you do that? Well, out of our own pockets, we sacrificed. We didn't ask the church to pay for it. Out of our own pockets, we bought matching sport coats. So everybody knows we're unified and we're the deacons. And I thought, no, everybody's intimidated because you're uniform and they don't have the uniform. Imagine if we all wore the exact same t-shirt next week. Imagine what it would feel like to walk into that room and the only one who doesn't have a t-shirt. That's not the most warm and friendly environment. We struggle with defining unity. And quite honestly, Tom Rainer doesn't really describe or define unity in this chapter of his book, which that book's available. It's on the information get desk out front in the lobby. If you want a copy, you're more than welcome to have a copy so you can see what he actually says. Because like I said, we're going to look at the passage of Scripture more specifically. And the bad news is, as difficult as it is to define unity, I'm not going to define unity this morning. Because I think what actually creates unity in a church more than anything else is the integrity of our character and our heart when it comes to unity. So look at the pledge for just a second. This is pledge number 2. We're going to be out of sequence a couple of times, so it's important to know the numbers. They're at the top of the card. Look at the card. This is what Tom Rainer said. Again, this is not a confession. This is not something we're asking you to sign on to. This is a summary of the chapter. And his pledge, the summary of chapter 2 is this: I will seek to be a source of unity in my church. I know there are no perfect pastors, staff, or other church members, but neither am I. I will not be a source of gossip or dissension. One of the greatest contributions I can make is to do all I can in God's power to help me keep the church in unity for the sake of the gospel. Now, Tom makes some excellent points here. I'm going to highlight just a couple of them real quick because we're not going to do an exposition on his words. We're going to look at the actual passage of Scripture in Ephesians chapter 4. He recognizes that we need to be, and we need to be committed to be, a source of the unity, which means our lives need to reflect that unity. We need to be doing something out of our character, out of who we are, in order to help encourage and help accomplish unity. And that's where our focus is going to be this morning. We're going to talk about some attributes and some things that are found in Ephesians chapter 4 that help us to be people of unity. Help us to be a part of what happens when the church gathers, what happens when you make the decision to become a part of or a member of a church and live out the call of God on your life, on my life, on our life in unity. So we're going to talk about that character. He also references there are some things negatively we just shouldn't do, and we'll address some of those as well. But I love his expression in the last phrase when he says, one of the greatest contributions I can make is to do all I can in God's power. In other words, unity happens by the transformational power of Jesus working in our lives to help the church be in unity, and this is key, for the sake of the gospel. The purpose for looking at this, the purpose we're going to study and look at this and make a decision to be a unified member of the church, of this gathering, of this people in this local expression of the church of God. The reason we're doing that is not just because it's fun and not just because it seems to be the right thing to do, but the reason we're doing it is because it enables the church to do what God has called it to do. And that is the gospel. And the gospel, if you've not heard that expression before, it is just an expression in the New Testament that describes the good news, the message of hope is the way we describe it a lot here at First. The message of hope that's found in Jesus. This is for the purpose that God has called us into his kingdom. Our transformation, our forgiveness of sins, our salvation when we trust Jesus enables us to be a part of the church and enables us to have that opportunity to become people of unity that impact and influence our church to be a unified place. So with that, let's go to the heart of what we're talking about this morning. Let's go to Ephesians chapter 4. We're going to look at 5 different characteristics. I'm going to be honest with you. I didn't write this well, or at least I'm not happy with it. So the points, fortunately, are not the Word of God. The points are just simply my ideas of helping us understand the segments. So if you're on YouVersion and you're looking at the notes right now, and in a minute, they'll pop up on the screens as we go through each one, and you look at it and say, that just doesn't make a lot of sense. I just want you to know you're not alone. I told Carrie last night, we were getting ready to pray together. I told her, I said, you really need to pray. Tomorrow's hard. It's a difficult message. Nobody really understands what unity is. I'm not sure I understand what unity is. I know what I want, and I know what I think, but I want to talk about what it means to be a unifying part of the church, and that feels like a sensitive, difficult message. And she said, well, what are you saying? I said, well, here. And I popped out the notes real quick, showed it to her, and she goes, this doesn't make any sense. So you're not alone. I struggled with this one. I'm just going to be honest. And so the points may not make sense, but hopefully the explanation of each point captures the idea that the Apostle Paul is saying to the church at Ephesus. This is a church the Apostle Paul founded. And so he's writing to a church he founded. It was a difficult ministry. We studied it last summer when we were in the book of Acts. Paul was potentially killed and resurrected, definitely at least came to the edge of death, and God restored him while he was at Ephesus. It was not a fun ministry. Lots of conflict, lots of difficulty, lots of demonic activity, lots of spiritual warfare in all the negative sense. And he's now in prison in Rome. And so he's in his own apartment, but he is literally 24 hours a day chained to a Roman guard as he's writing this. And in chapter 4, what we now call chapter 4 of Ephesians, we see these words in these 6 verses. Ephesians chapter 4, we're going to start in verse 1. He describes this situation, which the church at Ephesus already knew, we know as well. Therefore I, the prisoner of the Lord, urge you to live worthy of the calling you have received, with all humility and gentleness, with patience and bearing with one another, making every effort to keep the unity of the Spirit through the bond of peace. There is one body and one Spirit, just as you were called to one hope. At your calling, one Lord, one faith, one baptism, one God and Father of all, who is above all and through all and in all. 7 different times in those last 2 verses, the Apostle Paul uses the word one as an adjective to describe the different elements of our faith and the dynamic of what is lived out through the church. So how do I be a unified church member? One of the most critical points I think that we're going to talk about this morning is found in the first verse. I wrote it up as I'm a journey, not a destination. You're going to agree that's just about as bad as it gets. But what do I mean by being a journey, not a destination? Look at Paul's words again. Therefore I, the prisoner of the Lord, urge you to walk worthy of the calling you have received. Think for just a second of the dynamic of what Paul is saying here. I am urging you to walk worthy of the calling that you have received. The unique nature of our Christian experience is we have received something as a gift from God that we have not fully attained. We have the opportunity to be a part of something that we have not fully engaged. We have the opportunity to have something work in us in such a way that when it is done, everything is absolutely perfect, but yet we have not fully acquired and manifested that in our lives. And so the Christian experience is by its nature a journey. We call it a journey, or we use words like disciple, which means student, or discipleship, which is a process of learning and mentoring to describe this journey. Paul reminds the church at Ephesus, I want you, he's saying to them as his friends, as the former pastor and founding pastor of that church, I want you to walk worthy. I want you to walk respectful. I want you to journey. I want you to travel. I want you to live your life in such a way that the amazing calling on your life to know Jesus, to be changed by Jesus, to be forgiven by Jesus, to be eternally secure in Jesus, all the things that are wrapped up in that calling, I want you to know, but I want you to live. I want you each and every day, in each and every moment, to walk in that fashion, even though you haven't attained it. So I summarize it as I'm a journey, I'm not a destination. Here's the bottom line. I'm not perfect. The desire for perfection actually hurts unity. The comprehension that we're not perfect actually promotes unity. Because in my imperfection, I can acknowledge the need for the people in my life. I can acknowledge the need for the collaboration that happens in any organization, on any team, in any place. I can acknowledge that and I can be aware of that, but it becomes my reality that I cannot be a part of. And, as Tom mentions, he talks about gossip and dissension. I can't be a part of something that divides the collective, the church gathering, this church ministry, because I simply don't have the authority. I am not there yet. I have not conquered the mountain and looked back down on other travelers and tell them, hey, do this, do that, do this, do that. Because I'm not there yet. We're doing this together. We're in this together. That's the collaborative nature of our faith. That's one of the reasons God gathers us. That's one of the reasons all the individual parts come together and function, as we talked about last week. Because I'm functioning, and if I'm going to function correctly, I need to be unified with all the rest of the parts. It needs to be a collaboration that makes the desired event take place. In this case, that event is a reflection of who we will be in Jesus. Who Jesus is changing us to be. But I'm not perfect yet. And so I have to deal with that imperfection, and I have to understand in that imperfection the necessity of unity is there, because we are literally, in this case, literally, biblically, scripturally told, we need one another, because none of us is self-sufficient. None of us can do it all. Look at the next part in verse 2. He says, with all humility and gentleness. I summarize that part of verse 2 as, I'm a gentle person. I don't even know if that's a word. Word correct made me put a hyphen in it. I don't know if your version has a hyphen or not. I'm a gentle person. That's my attempt to be as relevant to a current culture that's confused in its language as I possibly can be. I am a gentleman. I have no shame in saying that. But if you're not a gentle man, then I'm hoping you're a gentle person. The main part is, the second part of the phrase I use to summarize this is, I'm not a menace. We can be a menace. And when do we become a menace? We become a menace when we forget that we're not perfect. When we forget we're all traveling. When we forget we're all on the same journey. And we need one another to successfully manifest this journey in such a way that it invites and attracts other people to join us. And I cannot do that if I assume not only my perfection, but I assume that in my perfection I have all of the answers. I know everything that should be done, everything that is a part. And I assume that my perspective on that, which is most of the time a reflection of my personal preferences in that area, are the absolute perfection of those preferences. And that everyone, if we're going to be unified, then everyone sweeps in with me. But that's not what Paul says. He says, walk worthy of the calling you have received in Jesus, and as you're doing that, do it with humility and do it with gentleness. Because if I know I'm not perfect, then I know I don't have all the answers. And that requires a humility in my life. We function together better when we're unified, and we're unified when we recognize the need for humility in our lives and for gentleness in our lives. I'm kind of a veteran at this stuff, church-wise. I've been around and I have been through some stuff. And I can tell you, most church conflict boils down to one simple thing. I decide that what I like is what everybody else should like. And when I decide that what everybody else should like is what I like, then I decide that what I like is absolutely right. And then I position myself out of arrogance to assume that I am actually perfect and assume that everybody should like what I like. And so I want everybody to come in place. I want everybody to get in line. I want everybody to step with me and like the same things so that I am always happy. And the bottom line of that is I value myself over everybody else. But Paul says, you're on this journey. Live this journey with humility. Live this journey with an understanding, a concept that there needs to be a gentleness about it. And recognize that there will be times of conflict. And there are times, actually, when we're called to conflict. Interestingly enough, the Apostle Paul had extreme conflict in Ephesus. And that conflict was necessary, and he knew it was necessary because the gospel, that good news of Jesus, to be shared with Ephesus means that we had to go up against structures and traditions and ideas and even spiritual principalities and authorities that resisted that good news, that message of hope that's found in Jesus. And that required difficult, strong, hard decisions. But he's saying, even in those moments, do it with humility. Do it with that sense of gentleness. And recognize, I don't have all of the answers. And out of that humility, then I value my relationships. I value the collaboration. I value that we do this journey and we're in this journey together, looking for a better thing in the upward calling, in that high calling that Jesus has placed on our lives. Because I'm not perfect and I don't have the answers. But I am working towards and striving towards that perfection. And that perfection will come. The problem is it hasn't come yet. And the Bible tells us it hasn't come yet because the Bible tells us exactly the moment. So if you're sitting there thinking, yeah, but it hasn't come yet, and I've been a Christian for 5 years, I've been a Christian for 12 years, I've been a Christian for 20 years, I've been a part of this church. When's it going to get here? And the Apostle Paul is real clear about that when he writes to the church at Corinth. And here's what I know for a fact. If your obituary was not published last week, you're not there yet. Because the only way you can be there is to be dead. And I'm assuming for the most, everyone who's in here, I'm assuming everyone who's watching on live stream or watching the podcast this week is still alive, which means you're still journeying. How do I know that? From 1 Corinthians chapter 15. 1 Corinthians chapter 15 gives me the promise of perfection. It describes, the Apostle Paul is writing this to the church of Corinth, it describes a moment when imperfection no longer exists and perfection exists. I'm looking forward to that. I am anticipating. I live with a sense of hope. I live with a sense of drive. I live with a high sense of motivation that day is going to take place. There will be a day when I am a perfect pastor. There will be a day when I am a perfect man. There will be a day when I'm a perfect friend. There will be a day when I'm a perfect dad. There will be a day when I'm a perfect father. All the areas I would like to be perfect. All the areas that I have at some point or another attempted to guarantee or push or convince people that I am perfect when I'm not perfect. There will be a day when imperfection is transformed into perfection. He says in that same passage of Scripture in 1 Corinthians 15 that in that day their weakness will be transformed into strength. Illness will be transformed into weakness. So when is that day? And here's the tough part. In that same exact moment, mortality, that means our finite ability, the fact that we are all going to die, will be transformed into immortality. Wow, that's bad news, right in the middle of a good morning. Had great coffee this morning. Nice atmosphere, a little cooler finally. And now the pastor says, the only way I'm getting there, the only way I get to the summit of this mountain, the only way this hike ever ends is for me to die. Because in that moment, I am fully transformed into the image of Jesus. In that moment, I no longer worry about walking worthy of the calling. I am in the middle of absolutely fully receiving the calling and all that God has in store. If that's the case, then the humility makes sense. Acknowledging that I'm not perfect makes sense. But understanding that I care because I am patient and I'm cautious to live as a peacemaker makes sense. Because if I'm not there, if I'm not perfect, and if I don't have all the answers, then neither do you. And we're all waiting for the same transformation to take place. And I will be able to announce at my funeral, you made it. Or if it happens the other way around, you'll be able to say at my funeral, you know what? He talked about this almost every Sunday. He lived his life in the cemeteries across the Houston area. He finally made it. He's there. But in the meantime, it requires patience. Again, look at verse 2. This walking worthy of the calling you have received with humility and gentleness, with patience and bearing with one another. Being a pacemaker, not a source of frustration. I care. I simply care. Which means then the higher calling of Jesus and the things that I'm called to and the things that I want to experience and the things that I can experience and on this journey that will ultimately and eventually take me to the place where I have arrived and I'm perfect in the presence of Jesus, absolutely reflecting his glory, not my own. In that moment, I will get there. And if I will get there, and if I'm not there now, then I just need to be patient with everybody else who's not there. Isn't that, we get frustrated if they're not like us or they're not there. And there are aspects in our lives, there are things in our lives that really frustrate it. I mean, it makes it hard because you're not there yet. And those things can be really important in our lives. I had a unique experience this year. For the last decade, for a little over 10 years, my wife has taught me, encouraged me, mentored me, influenced me into a love of the sport of baseball. Didn't ever like it as a kid, didn't ever like it as a teenager, didn't like it as a young man, but over the last 10 years, she's taught me to like it. My frustration this year was that I love baseball. I thought when the Astros played it. But I found myself this year not getting to watch the World Series because the Astros didn't make it to the World Series. And I struggled with that. And I found myself, after a couple of weeks while playoffs were taking place and everything was getting ready for the World Series, I found myself a little frustrated just missing baseball. I mean, I know. You guys are going to think I have such a pitiful life. We have such a pitiful life. But we're sitting there on a Friday night, and we're like, what are we going to do tonight? So we skimmed through the list on Prime. There is nothing on Prime. Prime has not produced anything in a decade that was worth watching. So we're sitting there. We don't want to watch that. We can go back and watch another 1960s Western movie, but we don't want to do that. And I realized I want to watch baseball. About that time, Carrie said she wanted to watch baseball. We said, we want to watch baseball. That's what we do on Friday nights. We watch baseball. We want to watch baseball. But the problem is the Astros aren't playing. Even worse, the two teams that are playing, how many teams do we have in the MLB? Do you know, Casey? 30 teams. Of the 30 teams in the MLB, the two teams I like the less are the New York Yankees and the LA Dodgers. I'm not even ashamed to tell you that. You criticize me, post it on Facebook this afternoon, send me an email. I don't care. These are the rudest, meanest. I mean, I could go on and on, but the point isn't how bad New York, how bad LA is. No offense. We got people from New York and LA in here that aren't really happy about that. But I'm torn because I want to watch baseball, but the only two teams playing baseball that night in the World Series are two teams I have no patience for. I am so tired. I personally, if I had unlimited wealth like some people who have really strong opinions these days in society, I would pay for the advertising to put in the jumbotrons in both stadiums. Get over it. We kicked your home plate in 2017. The game of baseball, in the first game that ever existed, cheated at sign stealing. Big deal. It's part of the game. Get over it. Do you know there's a whole new generation of people booing Altuve that don't even know who Altuve is? I mean, I've been watching him for over 10 years. I barely remember who he is. There's no need to be rude. There's no need to be mean. There's no need. Oh, hold it. I was just mean. That's just the whole problem with the whole thing. See, you can love something and you can be tested to the fullest extent of your patience, your ability to bear with one another. Now put that in the context of your church. You joined the church. You made the decision. You accepted Christ. You got baptized maybe at another church, and so you transferred membership into this church. Or maybe you accepted Christ in this church. You met Jesus for the first time in this church, and you got baptized, and you're a member of the church. Whatever it is, whatever moment, you made the decision to cross the line and become a fan and become a part of the collective and become a part of the gathering, and you're a church member. Is it a huge surprise that there are people here that you don't get along with? Is it a huge surprise that there are people here that irritates you? I mean, here's the unique nature of the church. I mean, I have been a part of so many unity issues and conversations over the years, and committees and task force and racial reconciliation task force. The entire time I've been in Houston, I have been in these areas attempting to, quite honestly, make life better for everybody. But here's the problem. The church is a place of grace, which means anybody is and should be welcome here. Whatever your perspective is. Granted, we have a confession of faith, and the unifying part of who we are is that confession of faith. You cannot be a member of this church and say that Jesus is just a teacher, that he's just a long list and he's equivalent to every other teacher that's ever existed, because we believe Jesus is the one and only God. And to be a member, you have to believe that. But you can believe that and have a personality that absolutely rubs me wrong. You can believe that and have ideas and concepts and conversations that are irritating. You can do that, and you can dress in a way that's irritating. You can do that, and we take in the church the most diverse group of people coming from the most diverse background and then ask them to come in here and play together nicely. It is the supernatural evidence of divine design that we do that. Because you can't do it anyplace else. You can't take a group this diverse and ever bring them together for a cause, for a purpose, without God's intervention. But what does that require of me? What does it require of me if I'm a unified church member? It means that I have to be patient. I have to bear with one another. I have to care. I have to value others above myself, always, in all situations. When are you the most unifying in any of your relationships? It is going to typically be when you know what your purpose and calling is. It is typically going to be when you're living with humility and gentleness, when you recognize you don't have all the answers, and it is typically going to be when you care, which will be reflected in your patience. I mean, the most loving relationship for most of us is our family. And who can get on your nerves faster than your parents? Oh, guess what? Who can get on their nerves? Who can get on my nerves faster than any other human on the earth? My kids. When they were young, my whole life I've trained, raised, competed dogs. Worked dogs in the field. I could tell you how many times as a dad I just thought the only way to handle these kids is to kennel them. But it wouldn't work well. Alexander's up in the booth today. I don't know if Erica's up there or not. You can ask them. I never kindled them once. But I did think about it a lot. And I can guarantee you, they thought about the best thing we could do with Dad is not kindle him in the indoor kennel, but kindle him outside where nobody has to listen to him. The people we love the most are the ones who will get on our nerves the most. So is it a real surprise that church oftentimes has conflict and difficulty? No. Because God has brought us from all these different places and put us here and said, now live together and accomplish my mission. Let this world know that it is as I prayed, as Jesus prayed, that they will know that you are my followers, that you are Christians by your love. Which is just the last simple thing I want to say. It's the very last part of verse 2. And that is, I'm a source. I'm not a drain on the church. The very last phrase, there's only 2 words. In love. God has called me for this higher calling. I am attempting to live it with humility and with gentleness. I am attempting to live it with patience and bearing with one another. And in what context? It's real simple. In love. I love my church. Is it difficult to make financial decisions when I want to give to my church? Yes. But will I go ahead and do the difficult part and make the decisions? Will I decide over the next 2 months what we're going to do end of year to help out the church and give the church the opportunity to finish up strong and head into a new year next year in a strong position? Yes. Will I make a sacrifice? Yes. Why am I going to do that? Because I think it's some tradition or some regimented thing I need to do? No, I'm going to do it because I love my church. I love our staff. Oh, they're like my kids sometimes. They get on my nerves, but I love them, and they love me. We enjoy being together, and we do things together. And mostly we talk about you in a good way, so don't panic. And plan for what God has in store. I love my church. I love our staff. I love the Lord, obviously, first and foremost. I wouldn't be a part of the church if Jesus hadn't changed my life, if I hadn't believed in Jesus, and if he hadn't forgiven me and begun a transformation process. Yes, I'm not perfect yet, but I am trying, and Jesus gives me hope every day to look forward to what is ahead. I don't give up because Jesus is the one who's in control, and I love him. I love the people of our church. I love our guests. I love people who are here for the very first time. Maybe I've met you. I just met Brian and Logan this morning for the very first time. It would be really creepy if I looked at them right now, pointed them out to you, had them stand up and say, hey, this is Brian, this is Logan. I love them. That would be kind of creepy. But I will. I love you. And I'm pretty sure most of you love me. Imperfection and all. Being somebody who is a unified member is somebody who simply is a source of whatever is needed because it's sourced out of love. It's not sourced out of obligation or a commitment or a signature. It's sourced out of love. And it's great to be a part of that team. When you read verses 3 through 6 this afternoon, you see that. Making every effort to keep the unity of the Spirit through the bond of peace. There is one body, one Spirit, just as you were called to one hope at your calling. One Lord, one faith, one baptism, one God and Father of all, who is above all, through all, and in all. I'm a solution, I'm not a problem, because I believe in my team. I believe in this church. I believe in the church universal, but that's a little hard to grasp. And so I narrow it down to something I can hold and see and know. You, this church. I can be a unified part of this church because I love us. I love being together. It's been 15 years. It wasn't love at first sight by any stretch of the imagination. But after 15 years, Ironically, battles and conflicts, scars and wounds, blemishes, and a lot of imperfection, and a lot of hoping and waiting for perfection, and a lot who've gone to perfection. I love you. And that's probably the greatest source of unity, is to love one another, which is what Jesus told us to do.